So my name's Steve Harvey. I worked in the shipping industry for 23 years. In 2002, in the city and in different places around the world, in 2002 my company gave me a sabbatical, a 4-month sabbatical. And it was up to me how I chose to use that time. And I connected to an organisation called Heart of the City, which linked up business people with charities, and they linked me up with a charity at that time called Graham at Hertfordshire. So at that point I knew nothing about charities or the voluntary sector at all, and I probably didn't know, well I know I didn't know how many districts there were in Hertfordshire, even though I'd lived there since 1987. I had no interest in any of that. So I went to meet the then Chief Exec of Groundwork, which is an environmental community charity based in Hatfield. And the end result of that was that I spent the next 4 months working as a youth worker in Borehamwood. And I absolutely loved it. It was like, how could I say? It was like finding somewhere to work that I'd always wanted to work, but I didn't know existed. That's a good way of putting it. Because in the city, working in the city, you've got to dress in a certain way and speak in a certain way, and you've got to like rugby, not football, and classical music, not punk rock, and etc., etc. People are making judgments about you and all those things all of the time. But then I've met this group of people working for Groundwork that didn't think about any of that. I'm just interested in doing good things for local people. But we're also very bright and we're running what I thought was a fantastic business. So I did that 4 months working as a youth worker, which was pretty mind-blowing. I didn't know anything about youth work. But really enjoyable. Then I went back to my job in the city after 4 months, and then about a year later, Groundwork, the chief executive of Groundwork, moved on, and they advertised for a new chief exec in the Times. And some of the staff members that I'd worked with at Groundwork as a volunteer for that 4 months contacted me and asked me whether I thought I could apply. So that was a big, difficult decision time, because it obviously had it had a lot of implications financially and so on. But I decided that I was getting more and more concerned about stress in my job in the city, and I'd had a few issues with that. I get concerned about my health. I had to do a lot of flying and a lot of hard things. And I weighed it all up and decided to apply for the job as Chief Exec at Groundwork. So I started as the Chief Exec, or Executive Director as it was called, in March 2004. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was a long answer, wasn't it?
That's a great answer.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, what was your role? What did you have to?
Well, so so it was Executive Director is the Chief Executive, if you like, is the head of the organisation that reports to a board. Now, I hadn't been a Chief Executive before. I'd been an Operations Director in the city. So I hadn't quite had that experience of ultimately being the person responsible for the organisation. I suppose, what does that person do? Well, lots of different things really, but you ultimately you carry the responsibility for the well-being of the organisation, I'd say, and the people that work there. And you report to a board of volunteer trustees who have some legal responsibilities about the governance of the organisation. But it's more than that. I think you've got I always felt like you had when you're the chief executive of anything or the boss of anything, everyone looks at you and the way you behave and your attitude and whether you think it's all great and whether you turn up on time and whether you're prepared to do difficult things and all of that. So it's kind of, I don't know, setting the right example is a bit patronising, but it's that kind of thing, I think.
Yeah.
And then you're like the face of the organisation. So when you go out and meet people and potential partners and politicians or whoever it might be, then you're representing the organisation.
A
Right.
groundworks perspective. Because you
Okay.
obviously lived in the borough.
Yeah.
Operationally, what was going on?
Okay. So what was going in Broxbourne? In terms of my own connection with the borough. So I grew up in East London and I moved to Broxbourne, Borough of Broxbourne in 1987 when I got married. And since then I've either lived in Broxbourne or East Herts. And I live in East Herts there, although the bottom of my garden is in Broxbourne, so I'm about as close as you can be. So the charity that I work for, Groundwork, delivered projects across the whole of Hertfordshire. So that was one of the things that I had to do at the beginning, was understand the 10 districts of Hertfordshire and the different nature of those districts, particularly with regard to deprivation and need. And Groundwork, like all charities, has got finite resources, trying to figure out where best to apply our skills and our funding and our expertise. We always tried to do that with the communities that needed the most help, if you like. So although I knew the Borough of Broxbourne very well, I knew it as a resident, and I didn't perhaps know it so well in terms of the different communities that lived there and where the areas of need were, and that was something I had to learn about quite quickly.
Yeah. So what looking back, what was your thoughts around working in Broxbourne?
Okay, so it's probably the same thoughts that I've got now, which is it's one of those parts of the country, or one of those parts of Hertfordshire. Broxbourne's one of those parts of...
Steve, if you could start with looking at...
Yeah.
Sorry, I should...
Sorry, no, that's all right. What do you want me to start it with? Just looking at the Borough of Broxbourne. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So looking at the Borough of Broxbourne, my feelings about it then are the same as my feelings now, I think, which is that it's one of those parts of Hertfordshire, one of those parts of the country where you have pretty deprived communities living very close to very affluent communities. It's got that mixture in it. It's got that mixture of green and quite urban. It's got the characteristics of being very close to London. So, most of the time when you meet people in Broxbourne, they either come from North London or East London originally, I would say. So it's got that feel almost of a semi-London suburb in the country. It's got a lot of different kind of ethnic communities within it. I think it's a great place to live because of its proximity to London and because it's got so much green space. I think it makes it a very attractive borough, but you shouldn't be fooled by the nice way that it looks, because there are quite a lot of deep social issues within the borough, I think.
Was that something at Groundworks that you uncovered, that you recognised that the borough had these areas of deprivation?
Yeah, I think so. There's in terms of the areas of deprivation in the Borough of Broxbourne, there's lots of statistical data that we can all look at to see where the most deprived communities are. But it's also, I think, about meeting people from local communities and starting to deliver projects with them, and then you get a proper understanding. So, for example, the Holbrook estate in Waltham Cross, an estate that I'd driven past thousands of times, but I'd never been there. And it wasn't until we started doing some work there and delivering projects there that you can really get an insight into that estate, and the fact that, you know, I can't remember what the statistic was at the time. There was like 80 different languages spoken on that estate. You know, it's quite a complicated estate. So the projects that we delivered on the Holbrook estate, I know that we, very early on in my time, we ran a big community consultation event on the playing fields there. I think the school playing fields on the estate, as a way of getting to know the local community and understanding what the issues were. I believe there was, and maybe is, a women's refuge in that area, and we did some work there in terms of the immediate environment of the centre. We did some work. We did some work on some environmental improvement work on the Olympic site across the road in 2012, which hopefully has remained as a benefit for local people as well. Yeah, so lots of bits and pieces on that estate. Yeah, I mean, did we cover all of Broxbourne at groundwork? Probably. I mean, groundwork has been in existence for, I should know exactly, but I haven't worked there for 2 years, since 1985, I think. So it's a long time, and has delivered many thousands of projects across Hertfordshire. Some worth £1,000, some worth £1 million, so the range is quite big. But because groundwork does a lot of work with schools, primary and secondary, in terms of environmental improvements to school grounds, or teaching young kids how to eat healthily or grow fruit and vegetables, or working with older students, trying to maybe enthuse them with landscaping skills to help them get into employment. That enabled us to deliver work in lots of different places around the borough, I think. As well as major projects like the New River. So New River runs from Hertford into London. This was slightly before my time at Groundwork, but one of Groundwork's major projects was creating a walking path along that New River so that people could walk the whole stretch into London. It wasn't I can't say this word, navigable before. So that's a project which is, it's about improving the local environment, but it's about exercise and getting people outdoors and living in a more healthy way and not using the car all the time, being able to walk and so on. New River comes through quite a big part of the borough of Broxbourne. We did lots of, certainly in my time, we did lots of partnership working with B3 Living. Don't know if B3 Living are part of your interview process, yes. So, as well, do you want me to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, working in partnership.
Yeah, so working in partnership with organisations like B3 was really fundamental, and we delivered some really great things with B3 Living because I think Groundworks' way of thinking was very similar to B3 Living's way of thinking. So we delivered a lot of projects around helping unemployed young people to gain skills and qualifications and get into employment. And the partnership with B3 Living there was about training young people in landscaping and gardening and so on, and that some of those trainees then moved on to become apprentices with B3 Living, so it was quite sustainable in that sense. But we also delivered some quite substantial landscape improvements within some of B3 Living's areas, like Macer's Court. I can't quite remember whether that's Turnford or Wormley, but it's right there. Yeah. Quite a major kind of improvement in terms of landscaping for the residents and so We did one at, I think it's called Levin's Drive, also with B3 Living, similar. So they were quite kind of large flagship projects delivered in partnership. So yeah, I think probably over the years, Groundworks delivered projects in most corners of Broxbourne, but with an emphasis on the communities that needed the most help, if you like. So, how does landscaping impact on residents? Let's say I mean, that in many ways that is like a classic groundwork project. So a residential area with a bit of green in the middle that's become overgrown and neglected and is a bit of an eyesore. And then groundwork may be working in partnership with the residents, maybe a local school, maybe the borough council, maybe a housing association. Maybe external funders, maybe the lottery, whoever it might be. The groundwork kind of ethos was always very much to first of all figure out exactly what the community needed and what would benefit the community most by properly engaging with people that live there and talking to them in a sort of meaningful way. So I kind of was lucky enough to be involved with or be part of many projects like that, where you can, by transforming that horrible bit of green space, which is either sort of just an eyesore or worse than that, is somewhere that maybe older people are scared to walk through in the evening, by transforming that into an attractive green space, maybe with somewhere for older people to sit and chat, or somewhere for young people to play, or somewhere for the community to grow their own fruit and vegetables, whatever it might be. I would say that has multiple benefits. So it's just like if you opened your front door tomorrow morning and there was a jungle outside with needles on the ground and it wasn't lit very well, you would get a feeling from that. Whereas if you open your front door tomorrow, as I'm sure you do, and there's a beautiful vista stretched out in front of you, that gives you a different feeling, like a feeling of pride or happiness or enthusiasm for the day or positivity. So that's a fairly sort of intangible benefit. Of course, it could have the benefit of improving the price of your house, the value of where you live as well. You know, people want to buy things with attractive green space, not with overgrown, scary, gloomy areas. If you involve the young people who live on the estate in the improvements, maybe by getting them to help design them or even help build them, or even better if you get involved with the young people and give them skills, and they use those skills to make some of the improvements, and then they can take some of their skills with them in the future, then that's a multiple winner, I would say. You might be able to create an area where people can exercise where they didn't have an exercise before, and we've all learned in the last year and a half how lucky we are to, if we've got a garden, just how lucky we are to have a garden. There's a lot of people who haven't got gardens. So yeah, it's multiple benefits, I would say. I can't think of anything negative.
That's good.
Yeah, no, I can't. I can, which is that it's got to be maintained, and there's a cost to that. And so it was always important for Groundwork that when Groundwork delivered a project like that part part of the deal, somewhere along the line, someone was signed, whether it was the housing association or the borough of Broxbourne, someone was signing up to look after it, because there's nothing worse than revisiting a project 10 years later and finding out that it hasn't been looked after.
the
Can I
project?
think of any projects in the borough of Broxbourne that are kind of stuck with me, and when I see them today, it gives me a nice feeling. Yeah, there's quite a few. So there's at the bottom of my garden, as I mentioned before, is a 100-acre estate in Hoddesdon, and there's a school there called Cranbourne. And probably about 10 years ago, Groundwork did a big project there to help improve the school grounds. And we used to have a staff team building day once a year where we'd go out and work for a day, quite often in the school grounds, and that was one of the sites we chose. And the landscape improvements that we made have evolved over the years, but it still looks like a really interesting and cool place for kids to play. So, and I walk past that at least once a week, so that gives me a nice feeling. I walk frequently in Broxbourne Woods, and there's I don't know if people know it. There's a sculpture trail there in Broxbourne Woods. Gentleman knows it. It's only about a mile, but it's got different carved sculptures, wooden statues, which depict different bits of history that happened in the woods. There's a Roman soldier and a rope maker and all sorts of things. Anyway, but Groundwork wasn't the lead on that project, but we had a role in that project. There's a little bridge there that we were involved in designing and other things. It was predominantly a Hertfordshire County Council project, a countryside management service. But we certainly played a role in that, and because I visited the site a number of times while it was being created, and I was there when the guy had his chainsaw and was creating these sculptures. It's just somewhere that I always go back to. I like to walk up there anyway, but it's quite nice walking around thinking, oh, the place I used to work had a part to play in that, and that has been a really good, sustainable project that still pretty much looks as good today as it did 10 years ago, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what external factors impacted on the service that Groundwork was able to deliver in the borough of Broxbourne? Well, for Groundwork, I'm sure it's true today, and for, I suppose, every other charity, funding is the key issue. Funding is the most difficult challenge for all charities. So, one of Groundwork's skills was knowing where to go to find funding to deliver the projects that were needed in local areas. So if we sort of take it as a given that funding's hard, because it's always hard, and some charities are better than others at accessing funding, I would say that the next key level of challenge for organisations like Groundwork it's a real cliche, but our partnerships are the key partnerships. So for Groundwork in the borough of Broxbourne, those key partnerships were, excluding external funders, excluding the lottery and charitable trusts and all of that, and national government. So the key partners really were Hertfordshire County Council, the borough of Broxbourne, the predominant housing associations, particularly B3 Living, and then schools generally, and other charitable organisations. I think, it's a strange one because this is my own take on it, is that although technically, deriving funding from local authorities, from government, is all about, it's very procedural and it's I can't think of what word am I looking
Red
for?
tape?
No, not red tape. It's commissioned. Sorry, that's the word.
Right.
Things are commissioned. It's
Okay.
a kind of independent,
Tendering
neutral
process.
tendering process. However, despite that, I think it is a lot of it is about individuals and personalities and relationships, and how an organisation is viewed by the chief executive of the Borough of Broxbourne, or by the the person responsible for the environment at the county council, or by the chief executive of B3 Living. And over the time I was at Groundwork, things kind of came and went a little bit. For a long time there was a chief executive at B3 Living who really understood Groundwork and valued what we could bring, and we certainly valued B3 as a really thoughtful and caring organisation, and that sort of chemistry led to a number of great projects being delivered. Perhaps in contrast to my first number of years at Groundwork, where despite my best efforts, it never felt like the Borough of Broxbourne treated Groundwork seriously, and never really brought Groundwork to the table that often or with that much intent. That changed. Different officers came in with a different perspective, different understanding, and some fantastic projects. Cedars Park's probably a great example where Groundwork played a huge role. A project led by the Borough of Broxbourne by one particularly fantastic officer who was great at partnership working, and good things were delivered for local community that that you can go and see today. So that could be quite a frustration when you feel as if, or your organisation has a kind of 30-odd year track record of delivering fantastic projects, and a key partner, for whatever reason, is not particularly taking you seriously. And it was the communities of Broxbourne in those early years that missed out, I think, because of that. We didn't deliver as much as we could have or should have in those areas. What changes did the work we were involved with at Groundwork impact longer term in the Borough of Broxbourne? Well, one element that does come to mind is the work that we did with Pete Maiden and Checks, and which I think is fantastic. I happen to think is a fantastic organisation that's done lots of really great things for younger children, particularly in the borough, particularly in those areas that need it the most. Quite inspirational. Now, neither I nor Groundwork's going to claim any credit for that whatsoever. However, we had a lot of contact with and partnership working with Pete right at the beginning, and I think that some of the direction that Checks have taken in terms of the outdoor environment at schools and growing fruit and vegetables, some of that was perhaps inspired a little bit by what Pete had seen with Groundwork and projects that Groundwork perhaps had delivered around the country over many years, and Checks have taken that in their own way and continue to do some fantastic things. And that's pretty good, I think.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. I like the story. So, my particular thoughts on volunteers in the borough. Well, I'd like to give you one example, which I think I think illustrates the power of what groundwork do, and also how what a little bit of volunteering can lead to for someone. So I won't use the gentleman's real name because let's call him Joe, right? So one of the things I think I mentioned earlier, Groundwork did a lot of work with local communities, trying to help unemployed young people who didn't quite know what they wanted to do or weren't motivated to do anything, to get some skills and qualifications and move into employment. And because Groundwork knows about landscaping and gardening, that was the area that we focused on. So we had a long-running project that's still running today called the Green Team. The Green Team typically then was a group of four young people that spent 12 or 16 weeks as volunteers working under the guidance of Groundwork supervisors, working as a team to deliver physical environmental improvements in the borough. And this was a team that where we were working in partnership with B3 Living. So we did a lot of recruitment from B3 Living's residents, if you like, within their residents. It was one of the very so the deal was that the four people, it was four young guys in this instance, would work pretty much full time for 16 weeks. And as they were working, we would be supporting them through to achieving qualifications. It's City and Guilds now. I think it was City and Guilds then. Can't quite remember. I think this was probably the first team that we worked with in partnership with B3 Living. And I got to know that team very well personally for different reasons that there's no need to go into. But so one of the young people, Joe, was, I think, at that time 16, not physically strong and very quiet and introverted. But he really enjoyed the work. He enjoyed being part of that team. The team achieved a lot of good stuff in terms of delivering projects. Then we set up a little kind of social enterprise with B3 Living where we employed some of the young people that have been on green teams to deliver maintenance work on B3 Living estates, and Joe was part of that team. Then he became unwell, and we had to agree with him that he couldn't do the work, he couldn't do the physical work while he was unwell. And I can remember some months after that, he phoned me up, and I met him at a coffee shop in Chesham, by the station, or near the station. And he felt he was better, and he was really keen to come back to work. And I wasn't quite sure about it at the time because I didn't want there to be any risks around his health. But anyway, he came back to work. He did really well. He eventually left that social enterprise set up, and he got a job doing grounds maintenance for News International, just by the M25 roundabout on the A10. And now I last saw him about 2 years ago, but I follow him on social media. He has his own landscaping business. He's got more landscaping kit than you can imagine. And he's also in the Territorial Army. And that's a pretty good journey from he wouldn't like it if I said sickly, but a fairly sickly 16-year-old kid who was nervous, didn't talk very much, not physically strong, didn't have any skills. That one bit of volunteering has led to him doing some, fantastic things. He's got his own business and he's in the army. Wow, that's pretty good. Yeah.